Okay, so you got the parts, kind of the basic, some of the basic parts that you need to know to understand what's going on here. So what I want you to do, in this course, we just have a little bit of metabolism we're going to talk about. We can't talk about everything in metabolism, but one of the kind of central things in metabolism is carbohydrate catabolism. How do cells use carbohydrate and extract energy, ATP? And so that's what we're going to talk about. And it gives you at least a perspective of the variety of metabolisms that bacteria can have, and just kind of what it means to talk about metabolism and the complexities and what enzymes are doing and all. So our learning outcome is name the 3 major ways cells catabolize carbohydrates. They break down carbohydrates and release ATP. And state whether they function under aerobic or anaerobic conditions. And I think you'll be surprised how many times this topic comes up for the rest of the semester when we talk about aerobes and anaerobes and where we find bacteria. This is a pretty important concept. So one of the first things I have on here is I recommend that you draw this concept map. Oh, I have this in your lecture study guide. It was number 6. I was just checking. Draw a concept map illustrating the ways microorganisms perform carbohydrate catabolism, and include these words. This is a really good thing to use right now to kind of see where we're going, but I would commit this to memory, because if you can remember the structure of what we're talking about here, it'll help you remember the differences between these things. So I put this picture here because when I drive to work, a lot of times I go by the area in the city of Corning where you can dump your yard waste. And a lot of times, especially in the fall, it's getting cold, and so I wake up and drive along, and there it's kind of, the air is cold, but you see this steam coming out of these compost piles. And what's happening is there's so many microorganisms in here breaking down the materials in the compost pile that they're actually generating heat. Remember when we looked at that previous, we looked at this little image, and it was showing you when we do catabolism, we take larger molecules, we break them into smaller ones, we actually not just generate ATP, but we also generate heat. So when you look at this pile, you're actually seeing the heat, the result of the heat created by bacteria in this pile of mulch. So we know carbohydrate catabolism is going on there. So when we look at carbohydrate catabolism, microorganisms can do this in 2 general ways. They can do it aerobically or anaerobically. So we're talking about how do microorganisms break down carbohydrates and release energy. And they can do it aerobically, which means they use oxygen, and they do it anaerobically, meaning they don't use oxygen. So think about humans. If we're trying to get energy out of our food, what do we have to do? We have to breathe. We take in oxygen. So humans are aerobic. The organisms, including humans, that catabolize their carbohydrates, break down their carbohydrates aerobically, do it in a complex metabolic pathway called cellular respiration. Okay? Organisms that break down carbohydrates aerobically do it using a metabolic pathway called cellular respiration. So you might have learned about this in A&P already. But bacteria, some bacteria can do it anaerobically. There's actually bacteria that do not use oxygen in any way, and in fact, oxygen is toxic to them. They're considered anaerobes, and their metabolism is based on a metabolic pathway called anaerobic respiration. There's another way that some microorganisms can break down carbohydrates anaerobically, and they do that by fermentation. And I know you've heard of fermentation. So in this, the rest of the lecture, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about cellular respiration, anaerobic respiration, and fermentation. And I want you to understand the differences among these and how that makes bacteria, how the bacteria are different. Okay, I put this in your lecture study guide. And you will notice, so the first picture I have on the second page of your lecture study guide, actually I have this picture twice, on the second and the third page of your lecture study guide. So use this picture to write on. All of what I'm going to talk about, it's a lot easier to look at this diagram than to write millions of words. So you might want to kind of jot down some notes on your picture in your study guide. So the first thing we're going to talk, is we're going to talk about aerobic cellular respiration. And I want you to write the overall equation for aerobic cellular respiration. We're going to find the reactants and the products in this diagram. And so what you're going to notice is right here, that says respiration. In your first picture, we're going to say that's aerobic cellular respiration. Okay. Over here is fermentation. We're going to ignore that right now. We're just going to talk about this part. So what's happening in cells that are taking things like glucose and breaking them down to release energy in the form of ATP, here's the overall equation. These cells that do cellular respiration, including our own, take glucose. You know how humans have blood glucose. So you can take glucose or other carbohydrates plus oxygen. And then this arrow right here is actually all of these arrows that I'm showing you here. So we go through this metabolic pathway, and by the end, we're going to have carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. I don't care if you remember the numbers here. Just know that 38 is a relatively large amount of ATP. The other thing to notice here is glucose is C6H12O6. It's got 6 carbons. Look over here. At the end, we have 6 carbon dioxide. So these molecules are converted into these, glucose is converted into carbon dioxide and water. Okay. So you want to memorize that equation. Glucose plus oxygen gives us carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. Actually, you have experience with this. We eat glucose, or we have blood glucose. We have glucose in our blood. We breathe in oxygen. We exhale carbon dioxide. We also make, and that's just a waste product. We also make some water as a waste product. But why do we eat sugars or eat carbohydrates and breathe in oxygen? To make ATP. So the goal of aerobic cellular respiration is to take food and oxygen and generate ATP. These just happen to be waste products. And if we look over here, we can find them. Here's the glucose at the beginning of the pathway. So this is a one big long metabolic pathway. All these arrows represent enzymes. So we have glucose. The oxygen actually on your picture is right here. So you can take that label that and say O2, there's some oxygen. Carbon dioxide, if you look in here, oh, there's some carbon dioxide coming out. There's some more carbon dioxide coming out. Water, this thing right here, right, H2O on that. So the oxygen, the oxygen is going to react with this molecule here, and you're going to generate water. And then ATP, you can see some ATP here, and some down here. Okay, so you can find the products and reactants in this diagram. So I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about aerobic cellular respiration. What the heck is all this and what's going on? So it says, give a general description of aerobic cellular respiration, the kinds of organisms that do this, and the role of glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. Glycolysis is a metabolic pathway. And it actually is, it says it right there, glycolysis. So this little part right here is glycolysis. And it's a metabolic pathway that takes glucose, takes food in a bacterial cell or a human cell, and it's processed through a lot of enzymes, and we end up with these 2 molecules of pyruvic acid. Now, and so it's not magic. Here we have glucose is a 6-carbon molecule, C6H12O6. It's processed through all these enzymes, and we end up with 2 pyruvic acid molecules. So if we start it with 1 6-carbon molecule, we end up with 2 3-carbon molecules. Okay, so that's glycolysis. And notice that you don't need oxygen for glycolysis to occur. And this is happening in every one of our human cells and in many, many types of bacteria all the time. Now, the other thing that's happening is the whole reason why we do aerobic cellular respiration is to make ATP. We eat food so we can generate energy, so we can build other molecules, build cells and things. And so we made a little ATP. We accomplished the goal. So ATPs, remember ATP is that energy carrying molecule that, that's needed in anabolism. But we're also making something else. We're making this stuff called NADH. Well, it turns out NADH is also an energy carrying molecule. It just is, if we look at ATP, like we say, ATP is the molecule, the form of energy we need for anabolism. NADH contains energy, but it's not used as effectively in anabolism. But it's still a little bit of a high energy molecule. So we'll come back to that. Okay, the second part of aerobic cellular respiration is we're going to go from pyruvic acid, and so there's 2 3-carbon molecules. They can be taken apart even more. So we can break the bonds between those and get more energy out of it. And so what happens is there's enzymes that break these pyruvic acid molecules apart, and they make these acetyl-CoAs, which are 2 carbons. Oh, there I lost 1 carbon. There's the acetyl-CoA. And then that's processed through a cycle of enzymes. And what happens is these enzymes continue to process that acetyl-CoA until it's completely broken down into carbon dioxides. I'm going to go back to the picture we were looking at, the overall equation. We said in the overall equation we have glucose, there it is, and all these enzymes are going to be involved in taking that glucose, breaking it apart into 6 carbon dioxide molecules. Well, these don't tell you the numbers, but ultimately this 6-carbon glucose is going to be broken down into these into 6 carbon dioxides. So all that bond breaking allows us to get some ATP, get some energy. So, and that is happening through the metabolic pathway called the Krebs cycle. And again, you're not seeing like anything where the oxygen's not going in there, but look at that. We made a little ATP. And ATP is our high energy molecule that we need to drive anabolism. We need that for cells to grow and to function. But the Krebs cycle was also able to make some more of that NADH. Remember we said that was another high energy molecule like ATP. And we've got this other stuff, FADH2. It's another energy containing molecule. Okay, so by the time we've gone through glycolysis and we get through the Krebs cycle, our glucose is completely broken down into carbon dioxide, and we've gotten a little bit of energy in the form of ATP, NADH, and FADH. Okay, so that's glycolysis and the Krebs cycle. I'm going to stop there and I'll pick up this concept in the next video.